I'm Danielle Manna, and this is my slideshow on natural selection and adaptation. So this is the instruction that I'm going to be giving you today. So before we get started, we're just going to do a little warm-up. I want you to get into groups of 4 and list 5 examples of adaptations that you can think of. Okay, so just first, these adaptations can be from plants, animals, unicellular organisms like amoebas, anything you can think of. So just write the definition and then a short summary, maybe just a word or 2 words about the purpose of that adaptation. Okay, so just for example, if it's a beak, what does it allow that animal to do? So I'm just going to give you 3 minutes to write this down in your groups. Okay, so now I'm going to have you in your group just pick one person to come up and write 2 of the ideas that your group came up with. You just can write the adaptation and then we'll have a brief discussion about what the purpose of your adaptation was. Okay, so I'm just going to write 1. So an adaptation for an otter might be webbed paws. Okay? And your purpose might be for swimming, or if you want to say locomotion or transportation or moving from place to place, anything like that. That would be its purpose. So what is an adaptation? I know we've talked about some, but let's get into what they really are. So an adaptation, it's the process by which an organism develops or has a trait, and it allows them to be better suited to their environment. Okay, and these adaptations, they're developed over a long period of time. It's not an adaptation where you wake up one day and all of a sudden you have this adaptation and now your species is adapted. It doesn't happen like that. It happens over a very long period of time. So how do they arise? Adaptations arise from mutations in the genes of organisms. So these changes in genes are inherited through sexual reproduction. And during sexual reproduction, an individual will receive 2 traits, 2 different genes, one from each parent. So you inherit one from your mother, you inherit one from your father. However, only one is expressed. So just a basic example, we're kind of just reviewing right now, eye color. You inherit 2 genes from your parents, but only one is expressed. So when we're talking about mutations, maybe one parent has the mutation and one of your genes will be expressed. Maybe it's the mutation and maybe it's not. We don't really know. So to go further, traits are either dominant or recessive, so this kind of connects to what I was talking about before. A dominant trait will be expressed over a recessive trait, okay? But a recessive trait will appear if an individual inherits 2 genes that are both recessive. So just to go back to that eye color thing, like blue eyes, it's a recessive trait. You will have blue eyes if both of your parents have blue eyes. There's a lot of different examples in the environment too. So fur color, so not every fur color is dominant. There might be a recessive fur color. And if you inherit 2 recessive genes for a particular fur color, then you will have and express the recessive trait. So if a mutation occurs, though, it could be dominant or it could be recessive. So when these mutations happen, it doesn't always mean, just because they're rare, it does not mean that they are recessive. And these mutations will occur randomly. You don't expect these mutations to happen, they just happen, they're random. And so they occur randomly in a population of organisms, and then these mutations arise, and they can be inherited. So we're going to talk more about that. Okay? And I may have neglected to mention this before, but I do know that as you are going along in your note packets, there are blanks. These blanks will be these highlighted, these bolded terms. So if I need to go back at all, just let me know. But if you're following along, you should kind of recognize that where your missing word is, it's highlighted right there. So if you're paying attention, you're following along, you shouldn't have a problem with this. Okay, so now we're just gonna take in that information that we've just gotten, that we just gathered and we talked about, and we're gonna brainstorm. So how could a recessive trait or a mutation become the phenotype? So the trait that's expressed that we're seeing in a population, in the majority of the population. Okay, so how could that mutation all of a sudden become the majority phenotype in a population of species? So this is supposed to be, I'm just gonna go back for now, but just come up with some answers. Okay, and then when I go back on that slide, I apologize, but the smartboard didn't block out those answers until I clicked. It just showed up. So just hold on tight. So come up with some answers in your group. So how could a phenotype, how could a mutation become the majority phenotype in a population of a species? So if this mutation arises, how could it all of a sudden become the majority in a species? Okay, so let's move on with our discussion. Okay, so a recessive trait or a mutation, or both, could be seen in the majority of a population of a species if that trait is selected for over a dominant trait. Okay, so maybe our gear should be turning and we should be thinking about adaptations, right? So the trait is advantageous to survival for the species in their environment. And if these recessive individuals who inherit this recessive trait are only mating with other individuals that possess that recessive trait, remember how we said that a recessive trait can only show up if the individual is receiving two recessive alleles from their parents. So two recessive versions will always give you a recessive offspring, an offspring that portrays that recessive trait. Okay, so these three points should be what you have discussed with your peers and what you kind of came up with. So I'm glad to see that happened. Oh, see, here we go. Now it. So adaptations and natural selection. Now we have to bring this together. Traits are selected for when that trait allows the individual to be better suited to their environment, right? That's what makes an adaptation an adaptation. They're better adapted, they're better suited to their environment. When a population of a species accumulates a trait over time that enables them to be better suited to their environment, they have developed that adaptation. So I know this is kind of a long phrase here, but it's easy to remember the important parts of the definition of an adaptation just by what's bolded here. So a population accumulates a trait over time to better survive in their environment, and that is what an adaptation would be. So how does this fit in with natural selection? They kind of go hand in hand, or they can go hand in hand. So natural selection is the process by which inherited traits cause an organism to be anatomically, behaviorally, or physiologically, and I know anatomically and physiologically might seem like the same word, but maybe anatomically, think of like the evolution of a human to being bipedal. That's more of like their anatomy. Physiologically, more like those webbed feet of an otter, okay? To be better suited to survive and reproduce in an environment, causing a population increase of those adapted individuals. Okay? Let that settle in, and just make sure that you're recording everything in those blanks of your note packets. So, if an environmental change happens that causes an adaptation to all of a sudden pose a disadvantage to those organisms, that population of organisms with the adaptation will then decrease. Does that make sense? So this adaptation could arise and all of a sudden cause these individuals to be better suited to their environment, but this environmental change could cause a population of organisms with that adaptation to decrease if something changes. And if an environmental change occurs rapidly and no members of a population have an adaptation that allows them to survive and reproduce in that environment, what's going to happen? They're going to go extinct, right? So think back to that initial definition of an adaptation. Over time, it occurs over a long period of time. This just doesn't happen overnight. And so if you have a massive environmental change and there are no organisms in a species that are adapted to survive in that environment anymore, that population will go extinct, okay? So it does have to happen over a period of time. Lastly, just this is a term that is really important scientifically and in ecological terms. It's used commonly, and I really want you guys to be scientists. I want you to be using the correct terms that we use in science. So fitness is an organism's ability to survive and reproduce in an environment, okay? So just two examples of how you could use fitness. If an organism has low fitness, if it's described as having a low fitness, that means that it is poorly adapted to or has a poor ability to survive and reproduce in the environment that they're within, okay? If an organism has a high fitness, it's highly adapted. It means they're well adapted to their environment and they're more likely to survive and reproduce. Okay, so those are just two ways that you can use fitness, and if you have any questions further, just let me know. But I want you to get to use that term. Okay, so I'm going to play this this link here, but just give me 1 second. I have to pull it up on the computer. Okay.
The eruption spewed a river of lava more than 40 miles long across the desert. As the molten rock cooled, it darkened, leaving any creature dependent upon camouflage in serious trouble.
So this video is about the pocket mouse. Be thinking about adaptation and natural selection and fitness when you are watching this video.
Not being seen. The evolutionary game of hide and seek. And we come here to the Valley of Fire in New Mexico, a battlefield, to find one of the tiniest soldiers and what it can teach us about how evolution works. On the desert sands, the rock pocket mouse blends in perfectly, its light-colored fur concealing it from predators. But on dark lava, the same fur makes the mouse stand out, attracting the many creatures that see it as food.
These mice are the Snickers bar of the desert. They're eaten by foxes and coyotes and rattlesnakes, and certainly by owls, and maybe even occasionally hawks, and most of those predators are visual predators.
So what happened to the pocket mice that found themselves on this new terrain? When I accompanied biologist Michael Nachman onto the lava, it doesn't take long to find out.
So this one's closed.
Nachman has been collecting mice unharmed.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see a little better with the lights.
And it's a dark one.
Sorry about that.
Now, are most of the ones you find up here dark?
Almost all of it.
Not only have the mice here evolved to be as dark as the rock, the color change has occurred precisely where it will conceal them from hunters. Now, a bit of a white underbelly, too.
That's right. All of the dark ones here and on other lava flows have a white underbelly, and presumably there's no selection for dark on the belly because predators are coming from above.
Left to themselves, the mice show no preference for light or dark rocks. It's the predators that have made the difference.
The change in color over evolutionary time in the population is driven by predators weeding out the mice that don't match their background.
But how did the dark mice arise in the first place?
When a black mouse appears in a light population of mice, that is usually going to be due to a new mutation. And those are random and rare events.
Mutations.
To fully understand the pocket mouse transformation, Nachman moves from the lava to the lab. He and his team extract DNA from light and dark mice taken from one desert region. The aim? Find one or more genetic mutations that cause dark coloration. A mutation is a change in the chemical letters that make up our genes. It's a copying error that may occur when our cells
Okay, so I'm
divide.
just going to try to fast forward. This isn't
Mutation seems to mean
what we're going to be
something
talking
bad.
about right now. We're going to talk
Well,
about that
mutations
later.
are neither good or bad. Whether they are favored or whether they are rejected or whether they're just neutral depends upon the conditions an organism finds itself. So for the pocket mouse, a mutation that causes a mouse to turn black, that is good if you're living on black rock, and it's bad if you're living out in the sandy desert.
The white mice are all on them.
Knockley focuses on how these genes differ in dark and light mice. The difference between dark and light mice boils down to a difference of 4 chemical letters in a gene called MC1R. Because the gene controls the amount of dark pigment in a mouse's hair follicles, a mouse with these mutations grows dark fur, which gives it an advantage on a dark background. But still, that's one mouse. How would its dark fur spread to a whole population?
Okay, pay
This
attention to
waffle
this.
is about 1,000 years old. And so you might wonder, has there been enough time? It's only been 1,000 years. It's a very short period of time for a new mutation to come along and spread so that all of the mice on the slough of flow are black, because really they all are.
Indeed, such a rapid spread of the mutation may seem unlikely until you do the math. And the reason is that while only one new mouse born in 100,000 may be black, hundreds of thousands of mice are born in any given year. And then those mice that are black have enough advantage that their babies do better, and they have more offspring, and their offspring have more offspring. And just about a 5% advantage compounded year in and year out can very quickly turn the whole population black, as we see today.
Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. And exit out of this and get back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so in groups of 4, I know that in the beginning of the class period I gave you 4 illustrations for 2 different environments. So reflecting on the video that we just watched, you saw that there were 2 different environments. There were the sandy areas and the areas where the volcanic rock came and caused the ground to be a different color. So you'll see that on your sheets. It'll be pretty visible. So I want you to, in groups of 4, decide on the sequential order that those pictures would go. Okay, they have pocket mice on them, so that should help you. Thinking back at our video, okay? And so if you have any questions, you can let me know. So we're going to work on that, and then it's going to lead into a guided activity, so I just want to... You're then going to create 2 to 4 graphs, okay? So it's up to you, depicting the pocket mice populations for environment A and environment B. So there's 2 different populations. There's the tan color and then the black color. So 2 to 4 graphs. You can figure out if you want to, get creative, think outside the box, and remember your units, your legends, and your axes labels, okay? That's written on your sheets. You should remember. And then there's these questions. This is on your sheet as well. I'm not really going to talk about this right now. I just want to get to, this is then your independent work. So you're going to write a summary answering the question of describing how changes in the rock pocket mouse populations at location B, so describe it through the pictures that you have, a description of how the population changes over time, what caused the changes, and a prediction of what the population will look like 100 years in the future, okay? So base it on the trends, use your graph to help you, and your response needs to include the following terms: mutation, fitness, adaptation, survival, natural selection, and environment, okay? So that should be pretty simple, but if you have any questions, just let me know. And then remember our character principle today. The point is this: whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So you know, the more you ask questions, the more you get involved and work hard, and get creative with your work, the more you'll gain from it. So just keep that in mind, okay? And then our exit ticket, I'm going to leave this on the board just so once we get towards the end, you can write this on just a scrap piece of paper. Describe an organism that has experienced an extinction threat and state one reason that that may have occurred, and how it's related to natural selection. So just describe how it occurred, but in terms that are about natural selection, or use terms that are related to natural selection, okay? All right, so you can keep working.